everyone, welcome back to Goodnight Stories. My name is Lyra, and I will be your guide into whatever book we decide to read tonight. From young readers to young adult novels, my hope is to give you a comfortable space to listen to a story. So, sit back, relax, grab a cup of tea. Tonight we jump back into Kathryn Lasky's The Siege, the fourth book of the Guardians of Ga'Hoole series. Chapter 12. The World According to Odalissa. Odalissa was counting the bits of bone, teeth, feathers, fur, and flecks picked from the owl pellets in the pelletorium and placing them onto trays in the inventorium. She had been working there for several days with Digger and two other owls. When the trays were filled, they were taken for storage in the library. But she, Digger, and the other two owls, a barn owl and a whiskered screech, were not permitted any farther than the entrance to the library. Once there, they would hand over the trays to Skench or Sporn, and only owls allowed in the library. Odalissa and Digger wanted to know more about this library, which was so heavily guarded. Was it just because the flecks were there and Skench and Sporn didn't want them stolen? But that didn't exactly make sense. Flecks slipped away all the time from the inventorium. Odalissa had figured this out just the night before. She had not yet been able to tell Soren, but this barn owl, 9201, while on duty, had slipped some to another barn owl. Odalissa was sure 9201 was an infiltrator, and she planned to watch her closely. But watching wasn't enough. Odalissa had become a master of disguising questions as statements in order to extract information. She and Digger had planned a small dialogue between the two of them that they hoped would encourage the two other owls to contribute some information. Digger yawned elaborately. I could use a good leg stretch. You know, a burrowing owl like myself never minds a long walk. I wish that they'd allow us to go into the library, if only to exercise. What a shame it is forbidden. It has always been strictly forbidden, except for Skench and Sporn, Odalissa added, knowing perfectly well from Soren and Gylfi that this wasn't completely true. Not always, said 9201. It worked. Odalissa thought at once. The statement was drawing out an answer to a question unasked. Once there was a fracas, I am told. An owl who had betrayed Skench and Sporn was killed, and Skench, through some strange event, was made powerless. Powerless? Exclaimed Digger. It is almost impossible to think of the Abla General as becoming powerless. Yes, almost yeep, said 9201. When an owl went yeep, its wings seemed to lock. It lost its instincts to fly, and would suddenly plummet to the ground. Unthinkable, Odalissa gasped in awe. 9201 seemed pleased that she had impressed this snooty owl. What does she have to be snooty about, after all? The barn owl wondered. But she was soon to find out, for it was as if Digger and Odalissa silently read each other's minds. All right, Digger thought. Time for you to show off what you know, Odalissa, gently. Yes, almost yeep, 9201 continued. It's hard to think of, I know, but it really wasn't yeep, mind you. It was magic. Magic? Odalissa exclaimed. No, I don't think it was magical at all. It was higher magnetics, probably, a typical higher magnetic reaction. The barn owl blinked. It was clear to both Digger and Odalissa that she was dying to ask a question. Odalissa took pity on her and fed her just a bit more. Yes, if Skench had been wearing diamagnetic materials, it would have happened. What? 9201 clapped her beak shut on the nearly escaping question. How interesting, she said instead. She looked almost in pain as she tried to contain the unmasked question. Later, after Digger and Odalissa had finished their work, they were able to talk in private on their way back to their stone pit. I was pretty excited for a while there with 9201, Odalissa was saying. But where did all that lead? We're no closer than before to knowing why the barn owl is sneaking flecks out, and what is going on in the library with the flecks. Where is she sneaking them to? How would the pure ones get to them? We need to talk to Soren. Too bad there are no sleep marches now, she said. The moon had dwinked again, and it would be another 2 days until they could meet up with the other owls in the Glossidium, when the moon-blinking process would begin again. In the meantime, they were allowed to sleep in their stone pits. Odalissa was startled when, in the middle of a very pleasant dream of swooping through a verdant forest on the track of a plump vole, she was nudged gently by her stone pit guardian. He was a large, oafish great grey, who liked his charges to call him Cubby. In the tradition of all the pit guardians, he was always promising Odalissa extra treats. "Sweetie, I hate to wake you. You were sleeping so nicely. I promise I'll have something good and fat and bloody for you when you return. But, my dear, right now, and this is quite an honor," he hunched his shoulders up, as if he were just tickled to death about what he was going to say next. "Who do you think wants to see you?" Then he giggled anxiously. "Oh, shh, don't tell. I let slip a question, didn't I? Well, you won't tell." Great Glocks, Odalissa loathed this creepy owl. "Of course I won't," she answered. "Good girl," he whispered. "But I'll tell you. Skench, the Abla General." Odalissa blinked with surprise. "This is quite an honor, I would say," he continued. "Follow me." Odalissa followed the great grey through the narrow corridors and stony slots of St. Aggie's canyons. St. Aggie's was a place made for walking more than flying. With its narrow corridors and endless skinny passageways, it was nearly impossible to spread one's wings. The air always seemed dead, from nary a breeze stirred so deep in the rock-bound place. And when one was required to fly, it was usually straight up from the ground with powerful wing flaps. St. Aggie's was a perfect prison for young owlets with undeveloped flight skills. Skench and Sporn's cave perched high on a cliff. Odalissa had never been there before, but she had heard talk of it. Now Cubby led her into a wider space and began to spread his wings. His span was immense, as all great greys, and the wafts of air shook the comparatively small spotted owl. Odalissa decided to take advantage of the moving air and launch herself onto its billows. It would be easier to gain altitude on these drafts than on the still, unmoving air. The two owls spiraled upward. "This way," the great grey flipped his beak over his shoulder and called to her. A pale rose-colored stone needle projected horizontally out from the cliff, piercing the air. Two great horned owls stood as guards. They nodded to Cubby and Odalissa as they lighted down. What could Skench and Sporn possibly want with me? Odalissa wondered. Note more about the northern kingdoms, and never before in their cliff cave. Every other time it had been down in one of the pits. "Enter," a voice commanded. Odalissa stepped into the cave and blinked. A white, heart-shaped face seemed suspended in the dim light of the cave. "Would like you to meet Ukla," Skench said. Odalissa blinked again, this time in confusion. Ukla? It was 9201, the barn owl, the infiltrator. "Ukla is her new name," Skench continued. "When she came here, her name had been Purity. You know all that nonsense about the pure ones." Ukla snorted derisively at this. "Never heard such nonsense in my life." Now Odalissa was thoroughly confused. She had thought that 9201, or Ukla, was a spy for the pure ones. But whose side was she on? "I can see you're confused, 4572. Swan tipped her head toward Odalissa, her yellow eyes set off by the unusually pale circular swirl of grey feathers across her brow. "You thought I was a spy," Ukla chirred softly, as owls do when they find something funny or amusing. "Well, I was when I originally came." "There are several," Skench added. "Oh, we know who they are, all barn owls. We're very suspicious of 8285, that barn owl you arrived with. All barn owls immediately fall under suspicion. The pure ones are dying to get at our flex. They want to take over the St. Agulus canyons." Odalissa swung her head between Skench and Ukla. What is going on here? She wondered. Is she or isn't she a spy? "But I saw Ukla sneak Flex out," Odalissa said. "Of course you did," Skench answered. "She can't have her fellow spies think she's become a turn feather. Ukla feeds them just enough information, some true, some false, so they won't become suspicious of her. The flecks she sneaks out are tucked into nests by the spy moss tenders in the hatchery, The nests with barn owl eggs. We retrieve them during shift changes. They are 2 other barn owls who work as double agents up there. They pull out the stolen flecks for us, so there's no harm done. Odalissa was dying to ask what harm they had been expecting. But she had to guess that putting magnetic materials into nests with eggs could cause a major disturbance in the gizzards or the brains of unhatched chicks. Even though Dewlap had seized the book, she had read enough of the beginning chapters of Fleckasia and other disorders of the gizzard to know that overexposure to flecks at certain periods in a young owl's life was not a good thing. And Soren had told them about how that brave owl, Hortense, had felt that the reason she was so small for an owl of her age was due to the large deposits of flecks that run through the creeks of Umballa. Perhaps flecks in the nest would cause the barn owl chicks to resist moon blinking, and to identify in some way with the pure ones. Now Odalissa swiveled her head toward Akla, and carefully began to phrase her question as a statement. Turn feather to the pure ones, she began slowly. No need for that, Skench interrupted, sensing what Odalissa was about to do. You can ask questions here, but not yet. We have some questions. Higher magnetics, what is it? Why, on that terrible night when those owls escaped more than a year ago, did I go yeep? It was the magic of higher magnetics. No, it wasn't magic, Odalissa replied. It was science. Magic and science aren't the same thing. I don't know anything about magic. Higher magnetics is science. Tell us about it, Sporn urged. What makes us feel strange when we are in our battle claws around flecks? Where do flecks get their power? Odalissa was debating with herself just how much she should tell them. This was different from giving them information about the northern kingdoms. They could do real damage with what they might find out about flecks. Akla stepped forward. There was a terrible battle in the woods, she said, between the High Taito Clud and his brother, and the owls from the great Gahul tree. Those owls did something to the bags of flecks that destroyed their power. What was it? We need to know. It was when it clicked in Odalissa's mind. Owls like this did not need to know. They needed to be kept ignorant. She would feed them false information, just for a little while, just long enough so she could gain their confidence, and the Chaw of Chaws could escape. As far as Odalissa was concerned, their mission was accomplished. They had found out what they had come to learn. There were infiltrators. A few, like Akla, were double agents actually working for St. Aggie's. The rulers of St. Aggie's didn't know much about flecks. Pure ones were planning to take over St. Aggie's, but because of the double agents, they might be thwarted. It was time to get out. But first, Odalissa wanted to know something. She would be crafty about how she said it. Although flecks in the nest of unhatched eggs will disturb the chick's brain in a certain way, exposure for adults is quite different. Oh yes, you are smart, aren't you? That's how we avoid being moon-blinked. Small amounts of flecks ingested lessens the effects of moon-blinking considerably, said Sketch. Just what I thought, Odalissa then continued. Well then, of course, you know about flux density. The owl stared blankly at her. You don't know about flux density? Oh dear, then I should begin at the beginning. Odalissa never mentioned that fire could destroy the flex power. She never told them that she had read that certain other objects that did not contain flex could temporarily gain the magnetic powers of flex by rubbing up against one another. Nor did she tell them about moo metal, which could shield one from the powers of the magnetic field. But she did talk. She talked and she talked and she talked, as only Odalissa could talk. She made up something she called the basic Fleckasian laws of Moss, which were complete and utter nonsense. Chapter 13. A Rogue Smith is Called. Deep in the ancient forest of Silvervale, there was a crumbling ruin of a castle. High in one of its few remaining turrets, in a stone notch, a scarred, ragged-feathered owl perched. He squinted through his remaining eye at the moon rising behind fast-moving, torn clouds. A storm was brewing. He turned his bare, hard face toward the bitter wind. The rogue smith of Silvervale would be arriving soon with his new mask. He had threatened the silly old snowy owl with death before she would agree to make him the mask, and then she claimed that the ingredients for moon metal would be hard to find. Nickel was scarce in these parts. She found it, however, after his pure guard lieutenant, Wortmore, had roughed her up a bit. But Clud did not want to think about all that right now. He wanted to think about the idea that had begun to stir in him when he lay wounded in the hollow of the brownfish owl. The idea of laying siege to the great Ghoul tree, with its secrets of fire and magnetics, its warriors and scholars. This notion had set his gizzard twitching and inflamed his brain ever since he had first thought of it. He would have no rest until he had captured the great tree. Beneath him, he saw one of the pure guardians spiraling up with a great snowy owl in its wake. "It's High Taito," the guard cried out. "The rogue smith of Silverware has arrived." The snowy owl appeared nervous, and the mask trembled in her talons as she clutched it. "Enter the turret," Claude spoke without turning his face. The two owls lighted down on the stone floor of the turret. The rogue smith of Silvervale placed the mask at Claude's talons. "Finest quality moon metal?" Claude asked. "Yes, High Taito." The snowy made an obsequious gesture. It was common knowledge that all rogues' blacksmiths were loners. They lived in caves and seldom consorted with other owls, except for matters of business, making battle claws, helms, shields, and the occasional bucket. A few acted as slip-gizzles for the great Ghoul tree, for even if in their isolated states they saw a great deal and could pick up information others might not have. Owls often became quite talkative as they were being fitted for battle claws. The Snowy, however, had never been tempted to become a slip-gizzle, not in the slightest. Now, as she worked fitting the mask to Clud's horrendously mutilated face, she realized that this owl was different from any other owls she had ever encountered. He was absolutely silent. His silence was as dense as the metals the smith forged in her fires. But through this silence, the smith sensed some awful thing. She wished this owl would speak, would say something. She felt she had to know what this owl was planning. Snowy owls have highly refined instincts for danger, weather, and certain kinds of celestial events. If what she sensed was true, for the first time in her life she was tempted to become a slip-gizzle. Finally, the rogue smith of Silvervale thought of something. She coughed once or twice. "I say, I have a new battle claw design. Some find it quite good. Knight in battle, exceedingly sharp. If you would like one of your lieutenants to try them out, I would be happy to do a fitting over my forge, no cost. You could have them on trial." "Light, you say?" the High Taito asked. "Oh yes, quite light, and a new kind of finely notched edge. Tears flesh beautifully." The smith could almost feel the excitement in the High Taito's gizzard. "You know, of course, I learned my craft on the island of Darkfowl," said the rogue smith of Silvervale. The High Taito interrupted her. "Darkfowl in the northern kingdoms?" "Yes, sir. High Taito." "Wortmore, get me Wortmore," Clud called. The Snowy's gizzard trembled a bit. The very owl who had been sent to rough her up was now being called to go back to her forge for a fitting. The rogue smith of Silvervale tried to keep her own talons from shaking as she hammered the third metal talon on Wortmore's left claw to a tighter curve so it would fit perfectly. "The High Taito and I are exactly the same size, you know, so what fits me will fit him." Wortmore was positively chatty now. He'd even apologized for roughing up the Snowy. "But orders are orders," he had added. He was a bit partial to Snowies, he had whispered. Lovely, thought the smith. But she held her beak and managed to keep up her end of the chatter. "Now, if the High Taito likes these, how many do you think he'll need?" "Well, certainly enough for the Pure Guard, and there are 80 or more in that division." "My goodness, that's quite a few." "Oh, yes, and that's only the Pure Guard. We've got many other divisions. By the time of the Great Massing, the size of that guard will be triple." Whitmer broke off as if trying to count. "The Great Massing?" Snowy asked. "Yes, on Cape Glocks." Cape Glocks. There was only one reason why owls would gather on the wind-battered cape that stuck out into the most turbulent waters of the Sea of Hulamir. That was the quickest, most direct route to the island of Hul. It was risky flying for most birds, except for the guardians of Hul themselves and maybe eagles. And that was exactly what the rogue smith of Silvervale realized she must do right now. She must go to those 2 eagles of Wambala, the ones who lived with the strange spotted owl called Mist. She was a bit of a slip-gizzle herself, and she might know something about that massing on Cape Glocks. As soon as Wortmore had flown off, flashing his new battle claws in the moonlight, The rogue smith of Silvervale began to gather her few belongings. She had to find a new location, that was for sure. There was no way she was going to hire out to make claws for the pure ones. She had a good run of it here in the ancient old forests, but she could set up her smithy someplace else. Umballa wouldn't be bad, especially since she was going there anyway, to find the eagles. She put her hammer, tongs, a few of the best examples of her work, in her metal box of live coals to start her fire into a sack made from the hides of red foxes that she had killed years before. She pulled tight the drawstrings, and clutching the bag in her talons, lifted into the night. She headed south by southeast toward the corner of Umballa, where the eagles roosted along with mist. Chapter 14. Escape. Soren crept up onto the nest he was sitting in the hatchery. Underneath him, there were 3 eggs that had been snatched from the nest of a barred owl in the shadow forest. It was a miracle that the members of the Chaw of Chaws were all in the hatchery, either as broodies or moss tenders. It had taken a lot of work, especially on Odalis' part. They were all shocked when she had told them about the double agent. Over the course of a few days, she had been feeding Skenshansborn a steady flow of false information, and thus had gained many privileges for herself. Through a combination of her sly wit, privileged position, and still more false information, she had managed to procure all of them positions in the hatchery, and it was from the hatchery that they planned to escape. It would have been better to escape at night, but the moon was full now, so they were required to be in the glossidium for moon bleaking, the effects of which they had all resisted through their strategy of concentrating fully on the cycle of legends of Ga'Hoole, and now in this dawn they were going to have to fight their way out. Remembering the legends would not help. They had only their talents, their beaks, and their powerful wings. If all really went well, they might be able to escape without too much of a fight. They had planned to create a distraction, under the cover of which they would slip away. Soren tried to quell his fears. He had to remember that, unlike the first time he had escaped from St. Aggie's, he now knew how to fly. He and Gylfi had never really flown before when they had escaped from the library a year ago. Their wings had barely fledged, and the only way out of that library was straight up. Here in the hatchery, it was still straight up, but there was a little bit more room to spread one's wings and gain a grip on the air. Their plan was simple. As soon as Odalissa had told them about the double agent, Soren, Gylfi, and Ruby had begun to sniff out other spies. Odalissa had told them to watch out for the double agents, the Turnfeathers, who were helping Ukla by taking the flecks out of the nests. When they had figured out which owls those were, they could launch their escape plan. Just 2 days ago, they had figured out who all the Turnfeathers were, and now they planned to expose them. A major fight would break out. Barn owl against barn owl, agent against double agent. The blood would spatter, the feathers would fly. It was under this cover of blood and feathers that the Chaw of Chaws would escape. Soren swept his head about in an almost complete circle. Everyone was in place. Martin, Digger, and Odalissa were plying the well-worn paths with their little bundles of moss and tucking them into the nests for cushioning and insulation of the eggs. Soren, Ruby, and Twilight were sitting on nests. Of all the owls, Twilight had been the most challenged by St. Aggie's. Independent by nature, proud of his experience in the orphan school of tough learning, St. Aggie's required just the opposite. Complete submission, humility, and unquestioning obedience. Yet Twilight had proved himself to be a superb actor. Now tonight he was going to be an actor no longer. It was Twilight who would instigate the fight by uncovering the Turnfeather agents. A barn owl moss tender was making his way toward the nest of which Twilight sat. It was one of the Turnfeathers. Perfect, Soren thought. They had been waiting for this opportunity. One spy had just put flecks in, and now another, a double agent, was ready to pull them out. Twilight would expose them both. "You! Barn owls!" Twilight yawned, and then a snarl seemed to curl his voice. "Your pal over there, 782, was just here stuffing in new moss, and now you're here taking it out." A silence seemed to fall over the hatchery. "What did you just say?" the Turnfeather asked, forgetting the rule of never asking questions. "Hi, same thing over here," Ruby piped up. Give a broody some peace, these barn owls." She couldn't finish her sentence. The barn owl who had poked moss into Twilight's nest minutes earlier suddenly flew back across the hatchery. With a rake of her talons, she slashed the head of the double agent barn owl. "Fight!" Twilight screeched. In an instant, the hatchery was an explosion of feathers. At first it was just barn owl against barn owl, and Soren himself had to dodge plenty of blows as he made his way up to the rim of the hatchery. But the owls who were not barn owls felt betrayed as well, so they joined in the fight. They didn't care which barn owl they attacked, for they were all spies and enemies of St. Aggie's. Finny was now flying directly towards Soren. 82, 85, you're in on this too, the voice creaked in a manner of huge rotten-timbered trees in winter storm. A jagged scar like a bolt of black lightning across her pure white face flickered ominously. "Got me a taste of barn owl, I do, I do." Now her voice seemed to seep out thickly, with relish at the very thought of such a taste. Soren remembered that she had an appetite for unhatched eggs and freshly hatched chicks. He could smell it on her, and it made him nauseous. She was advancing directly on him now, her talons spread for attack, her beak pulled open. "Egg-eater!" Soren screamed and dodged in flight. She kept coming. The sweet, nauseating stench rolled through the still air of the hatchery. Soren felt a slash to his tail feathers as another owl flew by and struck him from the rear. He saw specks of blood flying through the air. Finny was backing him into a corner. There would be no flight space. She was twice his size. Suddenly a voice rang out. A rhythm seized the air. It was Twilight. A taunt blistered the hatchery as the great grey flew straight in toward Finny. "Oh, auntie this, auntie that. You ain't nothing but a white feathered rat. 1, 2, 3, 4. I got something else in store. 5, 6, 7, 8. You're about to meet your fate. 9, 10, 11, 12. Oh, great glocks, you sure do smell. A special place for egg suckers like you. Yeah, you'll make a tasty stew." And he had gone into a yeep-like daze. She drifted to the ground, her eyes glazed in a kind of fascinated terror as Twilight danced in the air above her. Soren flung out his talons, toppled her over, and rose in flight. "Let's get out of here!" "Wait!" Twilight cried. "I haven't finished. I feel another verse coming on." "Are you yoiks?" screamed Odalissa. Come on, Twilight!" Gylfi swept by, and then suddenly Finny seemed to regain her senses. She stared at Gylfi, reached out with her one talon, and knocked the little elf owl flat. Gylfi trembled in a corner as the huge, now truly enraged snowy owl came toward her. I know you, she kept saying, "and I know your friend there, too. 82, 85, except that barn owl was 12-1 when he was in my pit before." Soren, hovering above, could not believe what he was seeing. Auntie had now reached out to grab Gylfi by the throat with her talons. Without thinking, Soren folded his wings and with a breathtaking velocity plunged downward. The force alone sent Finny sprawling. A dusty blur flew upward. With one rake of his talons, Soren opened an old scar on the snowy's throat. The pure white feathers ran red. "Behind you, Soren!" Odalissa called. It was Skench. "So you are an impostor!" "The owl who escaped from the library!" she screeched. Sporn was soon there, too, along with 3 other immense great-horned guards. 4 against 1. A taunt from Twilight wouldn't be enough. It was hopeless. This was the end for Soren. He could only hope the others would go on without him. They had to save themselves. They had to. But at that moment, just above him, he heard the voice of Gylfi. "Once upon a time, before there were kingdoms of owls, and a time of ever-raging wars, there was an owl born in the country of the North Waters, and his name was Hool. This was the first legend of Gahul, and how the great tree came to be. You see, some say there are enchantment cast upon this owl called Hool at the time of his hatching." Skench and Sporn and the other 2 owls stopped. Their wings fell to their sides. If they had been flying, they would have plummeted to the earth, but they were yeeps standing up. Gylfi is doing just what we did in the moon-scalding chamber, reciting this, the most powerful of all the Hoolian legends, Soren thought. Look at them. The flinch each time the word Hool or Gahul is uttered. Soren's voice now joined that of Gylfi's. "This owl called Hool was said to have been given natural gifts of extraordinary power, but what was known for certain of this owl was that he inspired other owls to great and noble deeds. Although he wore no crown of gold, the owls knew him as a king. In a wood of straight tall trees he was hatched, in a glimmering time when the seconds slow between the last minute of the old year and the first minute of the new year, and the forest on this night was sheathed in ice. Ever so softly, Soren flapped his wings and rose in the dawnlight. He kept reciting the first legend, the one known as the coming of Hool. And then they were gone. 7 owls faded into the breaking day. St. Aggies was behind them. Ahead lay the great forests of Umballa, then due north were the Barrens, then turning 2 points east of north was Silvervale, out across the bridge to Cape Glocks, out across the bight to Cape Glocks, then straight over the sea Hoolmere to the island of Hool and the great Gahul tree. Chapter 15. An old friend discovered. A small lake glittered in the sunlight of the crisp winter morning. The 7 owls were flying over Umballa, but it was too dangerous to continue in the broad light of the day. They could be mobbed by crows, and although Soren's tail had stopped bleeding where it had been slashed, it was painful. It felt like the shaft of one of his tail feathers had broken off. Whenever Soren tried to rudder a maneuver with his tail feathers, it hurt, and his turns were sloppy. He spotted a large sycamore below that grew at the edge of the lake. "Prepare to land, sycamore below," Soren called. The owls began to bank. Soren wobbled as they circled down. Finally, they were all perched on one long limb that extended out from the trunk of the tree and hung over the lake. There was a large hollow that could easily accommodate the 7 of them for one day. But just as they were about to move into it, a young spotted owl appeared and hovered overhead. "I wouldn't go in there if I were you," he said. "Why not?" asked Gylfi. "It's haunted." "Haunted by what?" Otalissa asked in a testy voice as she stepped forward. "By the scream of a brown fish owl," he said. "Smells like fish, all right." Twilight had poked his beak into the howl. "He was murdered," offered the spotted owl. "Murdered?" they gasped. "Yes." "Who murdered him?" Digger asked. "Metalbeak." At the sound of Clud's other name, Soren nearly toppled off the branch. If Digger hadn't quickly extended a wing to steady him, he would have. The spotted owl continued to hover, seeming to enjoy the fact that he had impressed these rough and worldly owls. It was really rack-drop sort of deal. "What do you mean?" Gylfi asked sharply. "Well, this brown fish owl tried to help Metalbeak. That owl flew in here almost burning up, feathers smoking, its mask melting, more dead than alive. The brown fish owl nursed him back to health. As soon as he was well, he turned around and killed the brown fish owl. How's that for gratitude? Can you believe it?" Unfortunately, they all could. "So, it's the brown fish owl's scream that haunts this place?" Otalissa asked. "That's what they say," the spotted owl replied in a casual tone. "Well, let them say," Otalissa continued. "I don't believe in screams. And besides, if such a scream exists, he must be a nice one, and perhaps he can nurse Soren here, who has a broken tail feather shaft." "Ouch, that must hurt," said the spotted owl. "You're darned right it hurts," Soren said, somewhat revived from the shock of hearing his brother's name. His whole body seemed to be throbbing with pain. "What's your name?" Digger asked. "Hortense," the spotted owl replied. "Hortense!" Soren and Gylfi both shouted at once. Soren forgot his pain entirely. "You can't be Hortense. That's a female name. You're a male," said Ruby. "In the forest of Umballa, it doesn't matter if you're a female or male. It is a great honor to be named Hortense. She was a hero beyond compare. A hero is known by only one name in Umballa, Hortense." The little spotted owl had settled down on the branch as he spoke. Now, perhaps, moved by his own words, he felt he should try to do something heroic to live up to his name. "I know where there are some fat worms that might feel good on that broken tail feather shaft. Would you like me to get some?" "Oh, that would be very good of you," Gylfi said. "I'll go with you," Digger offered. "The more worms, the better." Haunted or not, the hollow felt good, even with the fishy smell. Soon, Digger and Hortense were back with the worms. Otalissa and Gylfi arranged them as best they could at the base of Soren's tail feathers. "I wish Miss Plitherwell was here," Gylfi sighed. "Nestmaids are so much better at this than we are." Although the worms relieved the pain, Soren seemed to grow feverish as the day continued. An infection had set in. When night fell, he was thrashing about and certainly not fit to fly. It'd simply be too dangerous for him to journey in this condition, so they decided to stay. Toward midnight, Soren's breathing became uneven and labored. He seemed to be straining for each breath. The 6 owls were scared now, as scared as they could have ever been. An unspoken thought swirled among them. Is Soren dying? This could not be happening after all they had been through. They had fought Metalbeak and the Pure Ones. They had been to St. Aggies and escaped. Soren himself had slashed Finny's neck wide open. No, great glocks. It simply could not be happening. But the sound of Soren's breathing was terrible. It seemed to shake the entire tree. They watched as his breast heaved with each breath. His eyes would blink open and closed. They'd then blink open and look out, not recognizing anything. The owls were desperate. When Hortense came back with a new supply of worms, Twilight stepped out on the branch. Worms aren't working. Is there anything else we can do? Are there any nest-made snakes around that could help us? Anybody at all? The owl thought for a moment. There was one place he could go, but it was scary. It was the eyrie where two strange eagles lived, with an even stranger owl named Mist. They were not particularly welcoming, and Hortense's parents said it was best to leave them alone. A lot of crows lived up that way as well, and there was a grove of trees on the way to the eyrie that was infested by flying snakes. They did not have wings or even wing flaps like certain flying squirrels, but they could sail through the air in spectacular leaps and coils, twists and turns, gliding from treetop to treetop. And they were considered terribly venomous. But there were some who said that small doses of their venom could have curative powers. Still, it was risky, for they were known to be hungry and mean. The eagles had made their peace with the flying snakes, but they were the only birds who had. Isn't there anything you could do to help us? Gilfy had stepped up to Hortense. She was shaking with grief and fear. We have to save him. Hortense shook his head. I can't do anything. He turned away and flew off. He knew that the barn owl would be dead by morning. Hortense flew around and around through the forest. For some reason, he could not face going home just yet. His parents had a new set of hatchlings who would be yipping away, demanding food and attention. He kept flying about. He wondered if one of the new hatchlings would be named Hortense. That would be hard to take. He thought again about the dying barn owl. He blinked his eyes open and shut. The young spotted owl would never know exactly what made him do it, but suddenly he was carving a wide turn and climbing upward, higher and higher and higher. He was above the forest now and heading for the area on the very tallest peak of the mountain of Umballa. His gizzard quivered, and he could hardly hold his wings steady. Suddenly an eerie, luminous green scrawl slithered out of the night. I am not going to eat, I am not going to eat, the spotted owl repeated to himself. He quickly dodged the flying snake. 3 more snakes came out of the night, but Hortense continued. Then he felt a presence flying near him. It was not a snake, but he could not quite see what it was. It seemed as if a corner of a cloud had been torn off and was drifting in a lazy way, sometimes in his wake, sometimes off to one side, sometimes just ahead. But since it had arrived, there had been no more flying snakes. As he approached the eyrie, he saw the 2 immense eagles, lighted down on the edge of the nest, which seemed as huge as the treetops over which he had been flying. What brings you here, young'un? It was the male who spoke. There was a rumor that his mate couldn't say a word because her tongue had been ripped out in a battle. There's a barn owl down there. The spotted owl flicked his head in the direction of the lake. He's with 6 other owls, and I think he's dying. His friends are really upset. Worms aren't working. He thought he had heard a soft churring sound come from where the patch of cloud had settled. He looked in that direction, but there was nothing there still. He could have sworn it sounded like the chirrs of a spotted owl. Tell me a little about this barn owl and his friends, the male eagle said. Hortense could tell that the female was listening intently, and in some wordless way signals were passing between them. Well, they fetched up in the hollow of that old sycamore, the haunted one. So they say, said the male eagle. The one where the poor owl Simon had met his end. Simon who only wanted to do good. The male eagle sighed. The spotted owl could have sworn he heard another sigh, like a dim whisper. It wasn't the female eagle, but when he looked around, he saw not another soul. There's the wounded barn owl, his best friend, the little elf owl. He felt some sort of current go through the air. Then there is a burrowing owl and a big old great gray owl who looks really tough. The 2 eagles exchanged glances that seemed to say, could it be? Hortense continued with descriptions of the other 3 owls, but the eagles weren't interested. Fetch Slynella, the male eagle blurted out to his mate. The female was immediately airborne, and then once more the spotted owl saw a wisp of fog, no bigger than an immature owl drifting beside her. Was it a scroom? He wondered. No, the harder he looked, the clearer the shape became. It was a spotted owl, but a very pale one who flew a crooked path. This must be the one they called Mist. Finally, he could see her. The female eagle in mist returned with a flying snake. It was glowing like a scroll of green lightning. Meet Slynella, the male eagle said. The young spotted owl began to quiver uncontrollably. If he had been flying instead of perched on the edge of the eagle's nest, he would have gone yeep. His wings hung at his side like two stones. The snake twisted her flat head toward him. Her glittered turquoise eyes fixed him in her gaze. A bright, forked tongue slipped out. It was the strangest tongue Hortense had ever seen. One side of the fork was a pale ivory color, the other was crimson. Enchanted, I'm sure. The words slithered off the odd-colored tongue. Relax, the male eagle said to Hortense. She won't hurt you. Relax, he says. He must be Yoix. Hortense knew that inches away from him was a creature with enough venom to wipe out an entire owl kingdom. Slynella will fly with us to the sycamore. With a careful application of her venom to the wound, this barn owl might be saved. The eagle paused. If it isn't too late. Gylfi was weeping quietly in a corner of the hollow. The other 5 owls crouched in the shadows, helpless and too stunned with grief to move. Hortense did not hear any deep rasping breaths. He was sure that the barn owl must have died, but then he detected a faint movement in the sick owl's breast feathers. The hollow was not big enough for the eagles. The female merely stuck her head in and surveyed the situation. Then, in the soundless way she communicated something to her mate. Get to work, Slynella. This is a fine owl, said the male eagle. At that moment, Digger, Gylfi, and Twilight blinked. These were the eagles who had saved them in the desert. Son? Streak? Gylfi gasped. What are you doing here? Then there was a huge flutter. The owls all pressed themselves against the side of the hollow as Slynella, in one sinuous movement, slid in and hung herself in an S shape from a wood spur that projected directly over Soren. Calm yourselves. The snake is Soren's only hope. Only one side of her forked tongue bears poison. If she mixes it with the contents of the other side, she can provide a powerful medicine for an infection. The 6 owls stepped back. The snake lowered herself until her head was directly above Soren's battered tail feather. Flicking madly, her tongue sought out the broken shaft. First, I must pull out the shaft. No sense having a broken one. Then I can get to the wound with my tongue. Gylfi sank back against Twilight. The thought of that tongue probing Soren's wound would make her knees weak. In his feverish state, Soren saw something green and luminous swaying above him. Had that terrible scar of Finny's become green? Was it green? A green bolt of lightning now? He was fascinated. But why were all the others backing away? There was nothing to fear. Of this he was sure. His mind filled with thoughts. Come on, pals, nothing to fear. Hey, Hortense. Hortense, they thought you were dead. No, not that Hortense. The real Hortense. The one Finny threw off the highest cliff in the hatchery. Hortense, how did you survive? Streak caught me. He flew in at the last minute. Hortense, please don't tell me you're a scroom. I've met scrooms of my parents. It was too sad. Please, Hortense, you can't be a scroom. It's really going to freak me off if you're a scroom. My, you have developed quite a coarse vocabulary since we last met. Hortense, I'm serious. This conversation isn't just happening in my head, is it? Like we're with the scrooms? Definitely not. It was Gylfi's voice piercing through the miasma of pain and fever. I can't believe it. It is Hortense. How many Hortenses are there around here? Martin asked. Just one. The true one. The original, Streak said, poking his head into the hollow. Now she prefers to be called Mist. Yes, that's true, the real Hortense said. What happened to the other Hortense? What happened to that other Hortense? Twilight asked. We sent him off. Brave little fellow, wasn't he? I'd say he did a fine job of living up to the name, Streak said. Brave fellow, said the real Hortense. I think that's why he was able to see me, even in my faded, somewhat tattered condition. But I wanted this to be a true reunion among old friends, Hortense said, looking at Digger and Gylfi, Twilight and Soren. Is Soren going to get better? Gylfi asked. I think he'll make it, Streak said. Soren's eyes blinked open. The cloudiness that dulled deep black luster had cleared. I can't believe it. Hortense. Streak. Zan. All here, all alive. And you, Gylfi's voice broke. You're alive, Soren. Alive. Chapter 16. Let us fly, mates, let us fly. You see, the smith, the rogue smith of Streak had just begun to speak. The rogue smith of Silvervale, Twilight blurted out. We know her, Digger said. She's Madame Plunk's sister, Gilfy added. Madame Plunk was the elegant singer at the Great Ghoul Tree. Well, she came to Zan and me, but it was really mist she asked for. She seems to see everything, and sometimes she dreams things that happen. Just sometimes, Mist added. Remember, Soren and Gilfy, I told you that because of the heavy deposits of flex that run in the streams and creeks of Umballa, owls from that region can be both blessed and cursed. Gilfy nodded. Remember I told you that my wings were small and malformed because of the flex, that I had a grandmother who lost her wits entirely but my own father could see through rock. Well, I cannot see through rock. But sometimes I have dreams that seem to, how should I put it, look into the future. I can see things that sometimes happen in the future. Ever since that night when I saw the owl they call Metalbeak kill Simon, I had a terrible feeling. Glocks, I didn't realize it was your brother, Soren. Soren blinked. The more he heard about the death of the good pilgrim owl named Simon, a Gloxian brother, the worse he felt. He felt partly responsible for Simon's death, for if he had not wounded Clud so terribly, Simon would have never crossed paths with him and tried to nurse him back to health. Hortense continued. I began to have dreams, and one of my dreams was getting a great massing on a promontory that juts out into the Sea of Hulamir, but it was all so vague. It was hard to understand the meaning of the dream, and then this roguesmith, never did give her name, came to us, and she was so agitated that she could barely tell her story. But it seems that she had heard on the good authority that this awful group that chooses to call themselves the Pure Ones is led by your brother, and that they have been gathering barn owl recruits from all the owl kingdoms and forests. She said they are massing on Cape Glocks right now. There was silence in the hollow as the owl stared at the faded and fragile Hortense. But Cape Glocks, finally spoke. No owls would ever stay on Cape Glocks, not this time of year, unless... Yes, precisely, Hortense said. Unless they were planning an invasion of the island of Hul. We have to get back now, Soren said. Soren, Gilfy pleaded, you're not strong enough. The winter lights are beginning to blow across Hulmir. You're now missing one whole tail feather. Those don't just go back overnight. How will you rudder? We must go. We must warn the others. Warn the great tree. I'll make it. Soren's dark gaze bore into the little elf owl. Gilfy knew him well enough to know he would never be swayed. So that night, as First Black gathered in the forest of Umballa, the 7 owls made their preparations to leave. It was not an easy leave-taking, especially for Soren and Gilfy, who had never expected to see Hortense again. I don't know how to thank you, Soren said, as they perched on the branch of the sycamore. Streak, Zan, once more you have saved me. Hortense, that you're alive thrills Gilfy and me more than you can imagine. Your goodness and your selflessness have been a continuing inspiration for us. We would love for you to come with us to the great Ghoul Tree, for you have the most honorable of gizzards and a sublime heart. You would make a knight, a guardian most noble. But Hortense just shook her head. I'll visit some day, perhaps, but my place is here in Umballa, she said. Then Sora turned to Slanella. Slanella, I owe my life to you. You could have chosen not to come. You have spent your precious venom on me. I know that it weakened you. Streak and Hortense have told me that each time a flying snake spends its venom, it takes longer to replenish. That you did so willingly, with no delay, was a true sacrifice. How can I ever thank you? Worthy. You are worthy. A friend of Streak, a friend of Zan, and a friend of Mist is most worthy. Soren is such a friend. As she spoke, Slanella writhed in and out of her S-shaped designs. She hung glowing in the first black. Then, as the drinking moon climbed into the sky, the 7 owls rose into the night. The Chaw of Chaws was heading home, but not before stopping on the fog-shrouded cliffs of Cape Glocks to see what the roguesmith of Silvervale had reported was true. The night was thinning. As the black faded to grey, it was twixt time, that minute between the last vanishing drop of grey and the first tinge of the rose of the dawn. But today there would be no rose or pink or any of the pale she-shell colors that sometimes stain the morning, for the winter leaves were blowing hard. The morning was sloppy, with spume and icy sheets of rain. The visibility was terrible, and only an owl like Twilight, hatched on that silvery border of time between day and night, could see. He left the others and flew alone. Twilight could navigate in that dim time when the world was not quite black nor yet light, when the boundaries and the shapes of things became blurred with shadows and fog, and they almost seemed to melt away. And now, as he flew out from the sea-lashed cliffs under the cover of fog, he was seeing something that stilled his gizzard. Beneath him, on Cape Glaucus, spots of white were melting out of the grey fog. Hundreds upon hundreds of barn owls were gathered, their pale, heart-shaped faces tipped toward the sky, studying the weather. They did not see Twilight, for with his plumage of silver and grey feathers he blended in perfectly with the swirling fog. He plunged into a lower fog bank. Twilight strained his ears to see if he could pick up a scrap of anything they were saying, but it was useless. Still, he hovered in some dim hope that then he detected the shapes of 2 barn owls who were apart from the rest. They were most likely keeping watch, or perhaps they had flown out to scout the conditions at sea. Twilight flew into the thickest part of the fog and listened closely. "We can't fly in this wet, Ma," said one of the barn owls. "No, I doubt the High Toto would want to risk it," replied the other. "These winterlies can't keep us forever, though. There's bound to be a break soon. The wind should back around to the north by northwest." "Dream on, fools," Twilight rejoiced silently. This was their chance. The Chaw of Chaws could fly it, and within the Chaw of Chaws was the Weather Chaw, Ruby, Odalissa, Soren, and Martin. Those 4 could fly through anything, for they had been taught by the master, Easelribe. Twilight returned. His report was brief. "The bad news is there are hundreds of them, maybe even 1,000. The good news is they are scared to fly." "Maybe 1,000, you say?" Tigger's voice quavered. "They could outnumber the owls of the great tree," Odalissa whispered. "How did they ever get that many?" Soren regarded the Chaw. They were scared. He was scared, and fear could be as awful as any disease, as terrible as the fever he had just survived. It could spread. It could rage. He must do something to stop it. "We are the Chaw of Chaws. Do you forget that?" Soren asked. "We have already battled Metalbeak once. We have flown into the heart of tyranny in the St. Agulus Academy, and flown out again. You heard Twilight say the pure ones are afraid to fly. We must not be afraid. You are noble birds. Never has it been more true than we 7, the Chaw of Chaws, are guardians of Ga'Hoole. Our island stands in danger. We must go forth to warn and protect our island and our great tree with every bit of strength we have. We must not hesitate, for the battle will soon come to the shores of our island. So set your wings and point your beaks to slice the raging winterlies of Houlemere. Bend your gizzards to the task. Let us fly, mates. Let us fly." And I think that is where we will end for the night. I hope everyone enjoyed listening, and I hope you have a good evening and a good night. Till next time, my friends.